Imagine this. You're deep in the wilderness. The air is sharp and clean, the forest around you is so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. You're standing on a remote trail, one that almost no one ever uses. And then, out of nowhere, you see something on the ground. It's a pair of boots, muddy, worn, and clearly abandoned. They're sitting perfectly upright in the middle of the trail, as if someone stepped right out of them and vanished into thin air. There are no footprints leading away, no signs of struggle, no backpack, no jacket, nothing. Just the boots. And here's the chilling part, those boots belong to a missing hiker who should never have been anywhere near this place. Backhand index pointing right before we dive in, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this, stories filled with mystery, suspense, and real-life darkness. The disappearance. It began on a crisp autumn morning in northern Montana, in a stretch of wilderness so rugged that even seasoned rangers avoid venturing too far without preparation. The region is dense with towering pines, broken only by jagged cliffs, hidden caves, and fast-moving rivers that cut through the earth like scars. Locals call it the Edge of Silence, a name that's earned from countless stories of hikers, campers, and hunters who've entered the forest and never come back. The man at the center of our story was Ethan Calloway, a 32-year-old experienced outdoorsman. Ethan wasn't just another casual hiker, he was the kind of guy who lived for the wild. He'd grown up in a small Montana town, the type where kids learn how to fish before they can even ride a bike. His childhood was filled with camping trips, late-night fires, and daring climbs up dangerous ridges. By his late 20s, he'd become somewhat of a local legend, the guy who could find his way out of anywhere. So when Ethan announced to his friends and family that he was heading out for a solo weekend trek along a little-known trail near the Bitterroot Range, nobody thought twice about it. To them, it was just classic Ethan. He'd go off the grid for a few days, soak in the wilderness, and then reappear with stories and photographs. But this time, Ethan never came back. The last sightings. On the morning of October 12, 2019, Ethan left his truck at a small, unmarked parking spot off Route 93. It wasn't an official trailhead, just a dirt clearing with space for maybe 2 or 3 vehicles. He strapped on his heavy-duty boots, slung his pack over his shoulders, and disappeared into the woods. The only confirmed sighting after that came from a hunter named Lucas Harding, who reported seeing Ethan about 6 miles up the ridge. According to Lucas, Ethan seemed calm, cheerful even. He waved, asked briefly about the weather conditions ahead, and then continued up the slope. Lucas thought nothing of it, until days later, when Ethan's face was plastered on missing person posters across the county. When Ethan failed to show up at work the following Monday, his boss assumed he was just running late. But by noon, when no one had heard from him, the alarm bells rang. Calls to his phone went straight to voicemail. His family checked his apartment, his bed hadn't been slept in, his wallet was still on the dresser, and his keys were missing. That was the moment panic set in. By Tuesday morning, search and rescue teams were dispatched into the Bitterroot Wilderness. They found Ethan's truck exactly where he left it. But what they didn't find was any trace of Ethan himself. The boots. On the 3rd day of the search, a volunteer named Marcy Dale stumbled upon something unusual about 2 miles off the main trail. It was early morning, the fog still hanging low over the ground, when she spotted them. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. There, sitting neatly on a patch of moss, were Ethan's boots. They were positioned upright, side by side, like someone had carefully taken them off and set them down. The laces were untied, the tongues pulled open. But there was no sign of Ethan. No tracks. No backpack. No jacket. Not even a sock. Just the boots. Searchers were baffled. The area where the boots were found was far from where Ethan was last seen. In fact, to reach that spot, he would have had to abandon the trail entirely and bushwhack through thick forest, across unstable ground that even experienced hikers avoided. And the strangest part? The boots looked almost clean. Not pristine, but not what you'd expect after days in the forest. It was as if someone had placed them there on purpose. The discovery sent shockwaves through the search effort. Rangers scoured the immediate area with dogs, drones, and thermal imaging. Nothing. Not a single piece of clothing, not a scrap of gear, not even footprints leading away. Ethan had simply vanished. Theories began. Almost immediately, the theories started pouring in. Some believed Ethan had suffered a mental break, wandered into the woods, and deliberately left his boots behind before walking barefoot into the wilderness. But this didn't make sense. Temperatures at night had dropped to near freezing. Even the most hardened survivalists wouldn't last long barefoot. Others suggested he might have been the victim of foul play. Maybe he stumbled across something he wasn't supposed to see, a hidden camp, illegal activity, or worse. But then why leave the boots in such an obvious spot? Why not hide all evidence? And then there were the darker theories. Whispers about the Bitterroot Wilderness itself. Old stories told by locals about the edge of silence. Tales of people stepping off trails and never returning, as if the forest itself swallowed them whole. Some mentioned Native American legends of spirits guarding the land. Others spoke of strange lights at night, voices echoing where no one was. The boots became the focal point of the mystery. A haunting symbol of Ethan's disappearance. They were placed in evidence, studied, photographed, but no answers emerged. Backhand index pointing right if you're hooked by this story so far. Make sure you like this video, it helps the story reach more people who love mystery and true crime as much as you do. A family in agony. While the investigation unfolded, Ethan's family was falling apart. His younger sister, Hannah, refused to believe he was gone. She launched her own campaign online, creating pages, sharing photos, and begging anyone with information to come forward. "Ethan knows these woods," she said in a tearful interview. "If anyone could survive out there, it's him. He's alive. I know it." But Ethan's father wasn't so sure. A retired logger who had worked the mountains his whole life, he told reporters, "When the forest wants to keep you, it keeps you." It wasn't just grief talking. He knew how unforgiving the wilderness could be. He knew how quickly the land could take someone, even someone like Ethan. A bizarre clue. A week into the search, just as hope was fading, a bizarre new clue surfaced. Roughly half a mile from where the boots were found, a searcher stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center was a circle of stones, what looked like a fire pit. Inside the pit were the charred remains of sticks, leaves, and animal bones. Someone had made a fire there. Tests later confirmed the fire was only a few days old, around the time Ethan vanished. But there was no trace of Ethan himself. No DNA, no belongings, nothing to connect him to the pit. Had Ethan survived long enough to build a fire? Or had someone else been out there, someone who didn't want to be found? The discovery deepened the mystery. By the 10th day, official search efforts began to scale back. Volunteers still combed the woods, but resources were drying up. To this day, Ethan has never been found. The only things left behind were his boots, and questions that may never be answered. But what happened after the boots were found would leave even the most hardened investigators shaken. Because just when everyone thought the trail had gone cold, something surfaced, something so disturbing, it forced the case open again. Picking up the trail. After the eerie discovery of the boots and the strange fire pit, the official search was winding down. The sheriff's office, stretched thin with other cases, announced they were transitioning the search from rescue to recovery. In other words, they no longer believed Ethan Calloway was alive. But not everyone agreed. His sister Hannah refused to let the case die. She reached out to private search teams, wilderness experts, even psychics. And then, almost by accident, a lead surfaced that reignited the case. Two hikers came forward, college students named Derek and Alicia, who claimed they had been camping in the Bitterroot Forest the same weekend Ethan disappeared. On their second night, just before midnight, they swore they saw a flickering light moving between the trees. At first, they thought it was another group of campers. But then they noticed something strange. The light wasn't steady. It moved erratically, darting back and forth, then disappearing, only to reappear yards away. Derek described it as looking like someone carrying a lantern but running in circles. Alicia added, "We heard snapping branches, like someone was pacing fast. Then it stopped. Completely. Total silence." When asked if they saw Ethan, they shook their heads. But Alicia said something that chilled investigators. "I remember hearing a voice. Just one word, help. It was faint, but I swear I heard it. A trail of the unseen." Searchers rushed to the area the hikers described, but again, no sign of Ethan. However, they did find something deeply unsettling. About a quarter-mile from the supposed sighting, near a cluster of boulders, was a shredded piece of fabric. It was navy blue, torn badly along the edges. Hannah immediately recognized it as belonging to Ethan's favorite flannel shirt, the one he'd worn in countless pictures. For the first time, they had a direct link beyond the boots. But here's where things took an even darker turn. The fabric had traces of blood. Not enough to determine the extent of injury, but enough to suggest Ethan had been hurt. The sample was rushed to the lab. Tests confirmed it was Ethan's blood. So now the search had transformed. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore, it was starting to look like something violent had happened. The silent witnesses. In the following days, local residents started coming forward with their own strange encounters in the Bitterroot wilderness. One rancher who lived along the forest's edge reported hearing screams late at night, echoing across the valley. He brushed it off at first, thinking it might be animals fighting. But when he heard the news about Ethan, he couldn't shake the memory. "It didn't sound like a mountain lion," he said. "It sounded like a man. A man in pain." Another local, a woman who worked as a wildlife tracker, said she'd been following signs of elk migration near the ridge. She claimed she stumbled upon what looked like barefoot prints in the mud. Not animal tracks, human. But they were erratic, zigzagging, as if the person had been stumbling or running without direction. The tracker followed the prints for about 50 yards before they abruptly stopped at a sheer rock face. There were no marks on the rock, no handprints, no way to climb it. The prints just ended. And that word kept coming up again and again among those who joined the search, ended. The trail always seemed to end. Backhand index pointing right. If you want to keep unraveling this mystery with me, drop a comment below on what you think happened to Ethan. Was it foul play? Something supernatural? Or something else entirely? Your theories might just surprise me. A dark discovery. 10 days after the boots were found, a volunteer named Robert Klein was searching along a dried riverbed when he spotted something sticking out of the sand. At first glance, it looked like trash. But when he pulled it free, his blood ran cold. It was a cell phone. Caked in dirt, screen shattered, but still recognizable. The phone was confirmed to be Ethan's. Investigators immediately sent it to forensics to recover data. The battery was long dead, but when they pulled the files, what they found was chilling. The phone contained several videos taken the day Ethan disappeared. Most were ordinary, shots of the landscape, clips of him narrating about the trail. His tone was upbeat, confident, joking about how remote the area was. But the final video was different. It was shaky, almost frantic. Ethan's face filled the frame, sweat dripping down his forehead. He was whispering, his voice trembling. "If someone finds this, I don't know what's out here. I keep hearing things. Voices. They're close. I'm not alone. Please, tell my family I love them." The video cut off abruptly after that. The investigation shifts. Once the phone was recovered, the sheriff's department could no longer write off the case as just another wilderness accident. Ethan's final words suggested something, or someone, was pursuing him. But here's the problem, there was no sign of another person. No foreign DNA. No extra footprints. Nothing stolen. Experts began dissecting Ethan's last video. Was it paranoia? Delirium from injury or exposure? Or was he genuinely being stalked? Even stranger, the timestamp on the video showed it had been recorded hours after the boots were found. Which raised the most haunting question yet, How could his boots be sitting neatly on the ground if he was still alive, still running, still terrified? Had someone staged the boots? Or worse, had Ethan staged them himself? The shadow of the forest. To this day, locals swear there's something about the Bitterroot Wilderness that doesn't make sense. The forest seems to swallow sound, they say. Radios cut out. Compasses spin. One volunteer described it as feeling like the trees were listening. Some folklorists pointed to native Salish legends of the Stakini, night spirits that lure travelers deep into the woods before taking them. Others talked about the Watchers, shadow figures said to guard the ridges, seen only in fleeting glimpses between the pines. Of course, skeptics dismissed this as hysteria, a community spinning myths to explain the unexplained. But after Ethan's disappearance, even seasoned rangers admitted they avoided the area. One ranger confessed anonymously, "It's not just the missing people. It's the feeling when you're out there alone. Like you're being tracked. Like you're not supposed to be there." By week 3, the search for Ethan had shifted into something else entirely. What began as a missing hiker case had now spiraled into whispers of something unexplainable. Then, just when hope was collapsing, a new piece of evidence surfaced, one that would stop investigators cold. About 15 miles from where Ethan's boots were discovered, a hunter stumbled upon something nailed to a tree. It was weathered, eerie, and unmistakably human. And when investigators got a closer look, they realized it was connected to Ethan. Backhand index pointing right. We'll dive into this chilling discovery as we move on. A grisly discovery. It was a hunter named Mark Talbot who stumbled onto the next chilling piece of evidence. He was deep in the Bitterroot Wilderness, tracking elk, when something caught his eye on a tree about 20 yards off the game trail. At first, he thought it was just bark stripped away by an animal. But as he got closer, he froze. Pinned to the trunk, driven through with a rusted railroad spike, was a piece of clothing. It was torn, dirty, but recognizable. A dark blue flannel. Ethan's shirt. The fabric flapped faintly in the wind, the wood around it stained with something darker, brown, weathered streaks that looked very much like blood. Mark immediately called it in. Within hours, investigators and search teams descended on the area. The shirt was carefully removed, catalogued, and confirmed to match Ethan's missing clothing. But the way it had been displayed raised far more questions than answers. Who would spike a shirt to a tree in the middle of nowhere? Why? And where was the rest of Ethan? The ominous clearing. The tree wasn't just an isolated landmark. Investigators soon realized it sat at the edge of a clearing, a strange, oval-shaped space where the trees seemed thinner, almost as if deliberately cut back. In the center of the clearing was something even more disturbing, a ring of stones similar to the fire pit found earlier. But this one was different. Inside the circle weren't just charred sticks and bones. There were carvings. Symbols etched into the stones themselves, crudely scratched lines and spirals that didn't match any known markings from hikers or campers. One investigator later described it as looking like runes, or maybe some kind of ritual symbols. No one could agree on their meaning. But one thing was clear, this was not a normal campsite. Someone had been using this space for a purpose, and Ethan's shirt nailed to the tree seemed like part of that purpose. Escalating fear. When word of the discovery spread, the case exploded. National media began covering it, framing it as both a missing persons case and a potential crime scene. Online forums buzzed with theories, everything from serial killers, to cult activity, to the supernatural. The sheriff's office tried to tamp down speculation, but even their statements betrayed unease. They admitted that whoever nailed the shirt to that tree had done so deliberately. It wasn't an accident. And if Ethan's shirt was here, 15 miles from the boots, then someone, or something, had moved it. That raised the most disturbing possibility yet. Ethan hadn't simply vanished into the wilderness. He may have been taken. Hannah's breaking point. For Ethan's sister Hannah, the discovery was almost too much to bear. She broke down during a press conference, sobbing as she begged for answers. "Whoever did this, please, just tell us what happened. Please. I just want my brother back." She began to spiral, convinced that Ethan had been abducted by some kind of group, perhaps a cult operating in the Bitterroot Woods. Her theory wasn't pulled from thin air. Over the years, there had been whispers of strange gatherings in the forest, bonfires seen at odd hours, chanting carried on the wind, carved symbols on rocks. Most locals brushed it off as kids messing around, but now, with Ethan's shirt displayed like a trophy, it didn't seem so far-fetched. Backhand index pointing right. I need to pause here, because this is where you come in. If you were on this search team, standing in front of that tree with Ethan's shirt nailed to it, what would you think? Cult activity? A stalker? Or something darker? Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one. Strange noises. Searchers pressed deeper into the area surrounding the clearing. Over several nights, teams camped nearby, hoping to uncover more clues. That's when things got even stranger. One night, a team reported hearing whistles, short, sharp, echoing whistles, from different directions. They thought it might be other volunteers signaling, but when they radioed in, no one admitted to making them. Another night, a pair of searchers swore they heard footsteps outside their tent. Slow, deliberate, circling. But when they opened the flap with flashlights, there was nothing there. The next morning, they found something chilling, small piles of stones arranged outside their campsite in perfect little stacks. No one on the team admitted to making them. The forest was starting to feel less like a search zone, and more like a trap. The journal. Just when it seemed like the case couldn't get any darker, another discovery shattered what little certainty investigators had left. Roughly a mile from the clearing, a searcher found a journal. It was water-damaged, pages torn, but still legible. The cover had Ethan's initials carved into it. Inside were entries he had written during the hike. The early pages matched the tone of his videos, light-hearted, adventurous. But then, midway through, the writing shifted. The words became frantic, the handwriting jagged. One entry read, "I keep hearing them at night. Whistling. Always just out of sight. I don't think I'm alone." Another said, "Boots feel heavy. Can't run fast enough. I left them behind. Thought it might help. Doesn't matter. They still know where I am." And the final, half-smeared entry simply read, "If you find this, don't follow." The case turns cold. The journal was the last confirmed piece of evidence linked directly to Ethan. After that, no more clothing, no more blood, no more items were ever recovered. Theories spiraled wildly. Some argued Ethan was injured, delirious, and left behind clues that were later tampered with by pranksters or opportunists. Others believed there was a very real, very dangerous human threat in those woods, something organized, something ritualistic. But then there was the third group, the ones who pointed to Ethan's words, his video, his journal. The voices. The whistling. The feeling of being hunted by something unseen. To them, this wasn't just a crime. It was something beyond explanation. By late November, the snow began to fall, covering the mountains in a white blanket and shutting down the search. Officially, the case went cold. Ethan Calloway was declared missing, presumed dead. But months later, when the thaw came, hunters returned to the Bitterroot Wilderness. And one of them, deep in a canyon far from any known trail, found something wedged between two rocks. It wasn't Ethan. It wasn't clothing. It was something far stranger. And it would reignite the case in the most terrifying way possible. Stay with me for this shocking discovery. The spring thaw. By March, the Bitterroot Wilderness was thawing. The deep snow that had buried the ridges for months was receding, revealing rock faces, gullies, and riverbeds long inaccessible. That's when a group of hunters ventured into a remote canyon known locally as Devil's Basin. The basin was a treacherous cut of land, steep walls, loose rock, and winding paths that led to sudden dead ends. Few went there willingly, not just because of the danger, but because of the legends. Locals whispered that Devil's Basin was a place of echoes, where shouts never returned, where you could call out and the forest wouldn't answer. It was here, wedged between two rocks at the base of a cliff, that the hunters found it. Not bones. Not clothes. Something else. A notebook. The second journal. At first, they thought it was trash. But when they pulled it free, their hands trembled. The cover was cracked leather, water-stained, with Ethan Calloway's initials burned faintly into the corner. This wasn't the same journal recovered earlier. This one was different. Inside, the writing was frantic, uneven, almost unreadable in places. But as investigators later pieced it together, the contents painted a terrifying picture. The earliest pages mirrored the panic of the first journal, references to the whistling, the footsteps, the feeling of being stalked. But as the entries continued, they took on a far darker tone. One passage read, "They're close again. I don't see them, but I hear them. Always behind me. Always waiting." Another, "I left the boots. I thought maybe it would trick them. It didn't. They know." And then, chillingly, "The forest isn't empty. It belongs to them. I should never have come." The final pages were smeared with dirt and blood, but one sentence stood out clearly. "If you're reading this, you've already been seen." The unanswered question. The discovery of the second journal electrified the case. How had it ended up 15 miles away from the shirt? Had Ethan himself carried it? Or had someone moved it there? And why was Devil's Basin, a place so isolated, so treacherous, the site of this final clue? Some investigators believed Ethan had tried to hide there, desperate to escape whatever was chasing him. Others thought someone had deliberately placed the journal in the canyon, like a warning or a taunt. Either way, the words inside only deepened the mystery. Who were they? What did being seen mean? And why was Ethan so certain that the forest itself wasn't empty? The unexplainable photograph. Among the damaged pages was something else, a small, faded photograph pressed between two sheets. It showed a blurry landscape of trees and rocks, the kind you'd expect from a hiker's camera. But in the far left corner, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. Tall. Thin. Motionless. It stood between two pines, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, as though staring at the lens. Forensics experts later said it was too degraded to confirm what the figure was. Some swore it was a trick of the light. Others insisted it was a person. And then there were those who claimed it wasn't human at all. Whatever it was, Ethan had kept the photo in his journal. A clue. A warning. Or maybe proof. The psychological spiral. Ethan's family was devastated when they learned about the second journal. Hannah, his sister, clung to it as evidence that Ethan was alive long after his official disappearance date. He was fighting, she said. He was running. He knew something was out there. But Ethan's father saw it differently. He believed his son had been hunted. And not by anything human. In one interview, his voice cracked as he said, Ethan wasn't just lost. He was taken. Experts tried to frame the journals as signs of delirium, the writings of a man injured, dehydrated, hallucinating from exposure. But if that was the case, how did his journals end up miles apart, placed almost deliberately? And what about the photograph? A dangerous expedition. By April, investigators decided to mount one last large-scale search of Devil's Basin, hoping to uncover Ethan's remains. But the mission quickly devolved into something far stranger. The team reported equipment failures, GPS units cutting out, radios losing signal, batteries draining far faster than normal. Several members described an overwhelming sense of dread, as if they were being watched. One searcher, a veteran ranger with decades of experience, later admitted, "I've been in a lot of dangerous places. But Devil's Basin, it's the only place that ever made me feel like I shouldn't be there." After 2 weeks, the search turned up nothing. No bones. No clothing. No trace of Ethan. Only silence. Theories explode. With no body and no definitive evidence, theories multiplied. Cult theory: some believed Ethan had stumbled into a ritual site, his belongings deliberately displayed as warnings or markers. The symbols carved into the fire pit stones, the shirt nailed to the tree, all pointed to human involvement. Survival delirium theory: others argued that Ethan, injured and hypothermic, had staged these bizarre scenes himself in a haze of confusion. But critics asked, how could a delirious man trek miles barefoot, carrying journals, and leave such deliberate signs? The paranormal theory: and then there were those who believed Ethan's own words. That something not human was in those woods. That he was hunted, marked, and ultimately claimed by whatever forces lurk in the Bitterroot. Each theory was terrifying in its own right. The vanishing sound. And then, as if to underline the mystery, something strange happened during a follow-up search in Devil's Basin. A small team reported hearing a whistle. Not a bird. Not a human call. A sharp, clear whistle that echoed across the canyon. But here's the disturbing part: none of their recording devices picked it up. Radios and cameras went static. Only the searchers themselves heard it. And then, silence. A silence so deep, they said, it felt like the world itself had gone still. The Ethan Calloway case should have ended there, with no body, no answers, and only a trail of chilling clues. But it didn't. Because in late summer, nearly a year after Ethan vanished, a hiker stumbled upon something washed up on the banks of a river miles downstream from Devil's Basin. It wasn't boots. It wasn't a shirt. It wasn't a journal. It was something that forced authorities to reopen the case entirely. The last trail. The search for Alex had entered its darkest stage. By now, every rational lead had been exhausted. The boots, the one solid piece of evidence, had only deepened the mystery. With no signs of struggle, no torn fabric, no blood, and no footprints leading beyond them, investigators were left facing an agonizing reality: Alex had simply disappeared. But disappeared wasn't good enough for his family. His younger brother, Daniel, took it upon himself to retrace every single step, going beyond where the official search had ended. He convinced himself there had to be something the search teams had missed. Daniel spent weeks on that mountain, camping out in the same area where his brother's boots were discovered. He spoke to other hikers, studied old trail maps, even combed through Forest Service records, hoping to find a clue that tied together the inexplicable. He was driven not only by grief but also by a gnawing belief: Alex was out there somewhere. The unsettling discovery. It was mid-October when Daniel stumbled across something no one else had seen. Deep in a cluster of twisted cedar trees, in a place so remote it barely appeared on any maps, he noticed what looked like a small, hand-built structure, branches and rocks stacked into a kind of crude shelter. Inside, he found a rusted old tin can, blackened by fire, and a strip of blue fabric. The fabric stopped him cold. He recognized it instantly. It was the same color and texture as the shirt Alex had been wearing the day he left. When investigators returned with Daniel, they couldn't confirm it was Alex's. There was no DNA, no identifying mark, but the timing, the location, and Daniel's certainty gave it weight. Yet even here, in this chilling find, there was no body. No phone. No sign of where Alex had gone next. Theories multiply. This discovery reignited the case. Online forums, local news, even national outlets picked it up again. Suddenly, everyone had a theory. Some insisted Alex had lost his mind in the wilderness, slipping into a kind of survivalist madness, building shelters, abandoning gear, walking deeper into nowhere. Others were convinced he had been taken either by someone living off-grid in the forest or by something beyond explanation. A smaller group whispered about paranormal possibilities, shadow figures, dimensional rifts, phenomena known to plague remote wilderness areas where countless hikers vanish without a trace. Daniel himself admitted, quietly, that he sometimes felt watched in that area, like something unseen stalked him as he searched. At night, he'd hear the crunch of footsteps just beyond his campfire, only for them to stop whenever he shined his light. The final search attempt. In early November, before the first heavy snow, Daniel returned one last time with a team of volunteers. They spent 3 days combing the steepest, most treacherous slopes near where the boots were found. On the third night, one volunteer swore he heard a voice calling from deep in the ravine. A single word, "Help." They scrambled toward the sound, but when they reached the bottom, there was nothing. No fresh tracks, no signs of life. Just the endless silence of the forest pressing in around them. For Daniel, this was the breaking point. He realized he could keep searching forever, but he might never find Alex, or the truth. The mountain had swallowed his brother whole. And perhaps it would never give him back. The chilling aftermath. To this day, Alex's boots remain the only confirmed evidence of his disappearance. The case remains officially unsolved. His family holds on to hope, but as the years pass, that hope has transformed into something darker, a need for closure they may never get. The boots now sit in a box in his parents' home, untouched, a haunting reminder of the boy who went for a hike and never came back. Some locals say the mountain has secrets. Others whisper it doesn't like to be trespassed upon. Whatever the truth is, Alex's story has become part of the region's ghostly folklore, another chilling tale of someone who stepped into the wild and was never seen again. Imagine being Daniel, hiking those same trails where your brother vanished, hearing footsteps in the night, and knowing you are alone, but feeling certain you're not. If you believe mysteries like this deserve to be told, and if you want to hear more stories that keep you questioning what's real and what's not, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Because I tell stories like this always, and the next one may just leave you questioning the ground you're standing on.